Hello, my name is Olivia Brown, and today I want to talk to you about speaking English with confidence. I know from personal experience how difficult learning a new language can be. It's like standing at the bottom of a tall mountain, looking up, wondering how you'll ever reach the top. But trust me when I say that the climb is worth it, and the view from the top is incredible. I remember when I first began learning French, I was shy, unsure, and constantly worried about making mistakes. But I kept at it. Every day I would practice, even if it was just a few minutes. Now, after years of effort, I can have full conversations in French. And the best part? I no longer feel that fear I once did. I know you can get to that point with your English too. Let me share some of the tips that helped me, and that can help you speak English with more confidence. First, practice daily. It doesn't matter if you only have 5 minutes, just use those 5 minutes to practice speaking. I used to read random paragraphs out loud from a book one had by my bed. Sometimes I even talked to my cat, Bella. Of course, she never responded, but the act of speaking made me feel more comfortable. Over time, I noticed how much my confidence had grown just by practicing regularly, even in small ways. One of my favorite memories was when I tried to speak French in a small cafe in Paris. My pronunciation was all wrong, and I stumbled over my words. But instead of laughing at me, the waiter smiled and gently corrected me. It was a humbling experience, but it reminded me that mistakes are not the end of the world. They are just stepping stones on the path to improvement. This brings me to the second tip: don't be afraid to make mistakes. Making mistakes is part of the learning process. Every mistake you make is an opportunity to learn and improve. I remember the first time I tried to speak English in front of a large group. It was terrifying. My heart was racing, and I could feel the sweat on my palms. I mispronounced several words and even forgot what I was going to say. But when I finished, people clapped, and one of my friends gave me a big hug, saying, "You did it, Olivia." You were amazing. I realized that people were not focused on my mistakes, they were impressed that I had the courage to speak. Speaking of courage, here's another important tip: surround yourself with supportive people. I found that being around people who encouraged me made a huge difference in my learning journey. When I was learning French, I joined a small language group where everyone was in the same boat, trying to learn and improve. We supported each other, and it made the experience much more enjoyable. If you can, find a group or community where you can practice speaking English without fear of judgment. It will make a world of difference. Another memory I hold dear is from when I first arrived in the US. I was working as a waitress, and my English was still very basic. One day, a customer asked me for something, and I didn't understand. I was so embarrassed that I almost cried. But the customer was kind and patient, and she even tried to help me learn the correct phrase. That's when I learned one of the most important lessons: people are usually kind and understanding if you're trying your best. This ties into another tip: practice listening to English as much as you can. Listening is just as important as speaking when it comes to learning a language. I started listening to English music and watching TV shows with English subtitles. One show I particularly loved was Friends. I watched it so many times that I began to pick up on common phrases and jokes, which helped me feel more comfortable using them in conversation. Listening helps you understand the rhythm and flow of the language, making it easier for you to speak naturally. When I think back to my early days of learning French, I remember how frustrated I used to get when I couldn't find the right words. But with time, I realized that speaking a new language is like building a house. It doesn't happen overnight. You have to lay each brick carefully and be patient with yourself. So here's another tip for you: set small, achievable goals. Don't try to be fluent all at once. Instead, aim to learn a few new words each day or have a short conversation with someone. Every small success is a step closer to your goal. One of the things I did when I was learning French was label items around my house with their French names. It sounds simple, but it really helped me learn new vocabulary. I would walk into the kitchen and see the word cuillère on a spoon or chaise on a chair. It became a fun game, and before I knew it, I had learned the names of dozens of everyday objects. You can do the same with English. Labeling your home can turn something as ordinary as cooking or cleaning into an opportunity to practice your language skills. Now, I want to share another story with you. There was a time when I felt like giving up. I had been studying for months, but I still struggled with speaking. I felt stuck, like I wasn't making any progress. Then I met an older gentleman named Robert at a local language exchange event. He was fluent in 5 languages, and I was amazed. I asked him how he had done it, and he told me the secret is not to rush. Languages take time. The more you enjoy the journey, the easier it becomes. That advice changed everything for me. I stopped pressuring myself to be perfect and started focusing on enjoying the process. Here's another tip for you: find joy in the journey. Don't treat learning English as a chore. Instead, find ways to make it fun. Whether it's reading a book you love, watching your favorite show, or talking to a friend, make sure you enjoy the process. The more fun you have, the more likely you are to stick with it. I also remember how nervous I used to be before speaking in public. My hands would shake and my mind would go blank. But one day, I tried something new. I practiced speaking in front of a mirror. It felt strange at first, but it really helped. I could see my facial expressions and how I looked when I spoke. This made me more aware of how I was presenting myself, and over time, it helped build my confidence. That brings me to another tip: practice speaking in front of a mirror. It helps you get used to seeing yourself speak and makes you more comfortable with your own voice. Another great way to practice speaking is by recording yourself. I used to record myself reading short stories or giving little speeches, and then I would listen to the recordings. It helped me hear my mistakes and track my progress over time. I know it can feel awkward at first, but it's a powerful tool for improving your speaking skills. Now, let me tell you about my friend James. He moved to the US from Brazil, and when he first arrived, he barely spoke any English. He was incredibly smart and hardworking, but the language barrier made it difficult for him to find a job. He told me once, "Olivia, I don't think I'll ever be able to speak English fluently," but he didn't give up. Every day, he practiced. He watched movies, read books, and talked to anyone who would listen. Slowly but surely, his English improved. James's story is a reminder that persistence is key. Learning a language is a marathon, not a sprint. There will be days when you feel like you're not making any progress, but if you keep going, you will improve. Just like James, you have to keep pushing forward, even when it feels hard. I remember the day James got his first job interview in English. He was so nervous, but he had prepared for weeks. When he got to the interview, he realized that it wasn't just about his language skills, it was about his attitude, his determination, and his willingness to learn. He didn't speak perfectly, but he spoke with confidence. And you know what? He got the job. His story is proof that confidence is just as important as language skills. So, here's another tip: believe in yourself. Confidence comes from within. Even if you don't speak perfectly, if you believe in your ability to communicate, others will too. Let me share one more story before we continue with more tips. When I was in college, I had a friend named Sarah who was learning English just like me. She was brilliant, top of the class in every subject, but she was terrified of speaking in English. She always worried that people would judge her for her accent or grammar mistakes. One day, she finally mustered the courage to give a presentation in English. It wasn't perfect. She stumbled over a few words and paused awkwardly at times, but when she finished, the entire class applauded. Her professor came up to her afterward and said, "Sarah, your passion shines through your words." Don't ever be afraid to speak. That moment changed Sarah's life. It taught her that what matters most is the message you're trying to communicate, not how perfectly you say it. So here's another important tip: focus on your message, not your mistakes. When you speak, what matters most is what you're trying to say. Don't get caught up in the little mistakes. Instead, Focus on communicating your ideas clearly and with passion. Hello, my name is Emma, and today I want to share my story with you. A story of how I learned to speak English fluently and confidently, and how it transformed my life. When I was a child, the sound of English was always around me. It was on television, in books, and I heard it in the streets. I would listen to the characters on TV and dream of speaking like them, with that ease, that fluency. But whenever I tried, it felt like the words were locked inside me, and I couldn't find the key to let them out. I remember the first time I tried speaking English outside of my school. My voice trembled, and I struggled to find the right words. The person I spoke to smiled politely, but I could see the confusion on their face. It hurt. I felt so small, like my words were too weak to carry my thoughts. People would sometimes laugh, and I started to believe that maybe English was something I would never fully understand. I would sit in my room, surrounded by books, practicing words over and over again. I would read sentences aloud, trying to perfect every sound. But no matter how hard I tried, I felt like I was never good enough. My throat would tighten with frustration, and tears would sting my eyes. I would think, why can't I be like them? Why can't I speak as easily as they do? It felt like a mountain I could never climb, and I wondered if I would ever be able to speak confidently. Then one day, everything changed. I met someone who would change the way I saw myself and the way I approached learning English. Her name was Mrs. Carter, and she was my English teacher. She had a warm, kind smile, and she always seemed to understand the struggles of her students. She saw how much I was struggling, and one day after class, she asked me to stay behind. We sat down, and she made me a cup of tea. There was something calming about being in her presence. She looked at me and said, "Emma, you are too hard on yourself. English is not about being perfect. It's about being brave enough to try." Her words stuck with me. She told me something that would change my approach forever. Mistakes are not your enemies. They are your teachers. From that day on, I started to look at English differently. Instead of seeing my mistakes as failures, I began to see them as opportunities to grow. I realized that each mistake I made was a step toward improvement. I stopped being afraid of sounding awkward, and I stopped trying to be perfect. I began to focus on expressing myself, no matter how broken my sentences might be. And slowly, something amazing started to happen. I practiced every single day. I would stand in front of the mirror, speaking to myself in English. I would read books aloud, even if the words felt clumsy on my tongue. I would record my voice and listen to it, cringing at my mistakes but knowing that each time I tried, I was getting better. I started to write in a journal, forcing myself to think and express my thoughts in English. It was hard at first, but as the days passed, it started to feel a little more natural. One of the most important things I did was surround myself with English. I watched movies, listened to music, and read books in English. At first, I struggled to keep up. There were so many words I didn't understand, but I didn't let that stop me. I started keeping a notebook where I would write down new words and phrases. I would practice them until they became part of my vocabulary. Every new word I learned felt like a small victory. There were days, of course, when it felt impossible. Days when I wanted to give up. I would try to have conversations, but the words wouldn't come, and I would feel like I was failing. But every time I thought about quitting, I remembered what Mrs. Carter had told me. I reminded myself that fluency wasn't a destination I had to reach in a hurry. It was a journey, and every step I took, no matter how small, was progress. One of the most memorable moments of my journey happened in a small coffee shop. I was sitting there, enjoying a quiet afternoon, when a tourist approached me. She asked for directions in English, and for the first time in my life, I didn't panic. My heart raced, but I took a deep breath and smiled. "You can do this," I whispered to myself. I spoke slowly, choosing my words carefully. And to my surprise, she understood me perfectly. When she thanked me and walked away, I felt a sense of pride that I had never felt before. I had done it. I had communicated in English, fluently and confidently. That moment felt like a turning point. It wasn't about speaking perfectly. It was about the fact that I had tried and I had succeeded. I realized then that confidence doesn't come from never making mistakes. Confidence comes from trying, from speaking even when you're scared, from pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. I often think back to the girl I used to be, the girl who was too afraid to speak. I wish I could go back in time and tell her that everything would be okay, that it's okay to stumble, that it's okay to make mistakes, because every mistake is a lesson. Every stumble is a step forward, and one day she would be standing here, speaking fluently and confidently, sharing her story with the world. My journey with English has been long, and it hasn't always been easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when I thought I would never be good enough. But those moments made me stronger. They taught me perseverance, and they taught me that the only way to truly fail is to stop trying. I kept going, even when it was hard, and that made all the difference. If there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this: you are capable of so much more than you think. Fluency in English isn't some impossible dream. It's something that is within your reach if you keep pushing forward, if you keep practicing, if you believe in yourself. There will be moments when it feels too hard, when you want to give up. But I promise you, Every small step you take brings you closer to your goal. One of the things that helped me the most was surrounding myself with people who spoke English. I joined conversation groups where I could practice speaking without fear of judgment. At first, I felt awkward and shy, but over time I began to feel more comfortable. The more I spoke, the more natural it became. I realized that the only way to improve was to keep speaking, even if I made mistakes. I also started to set small goals for myself. I would pick one new word every day and try to use it in a sentence. I would practice speaking in front of the mirror for 5 minutes each morning. These small goals kept me motivated, and they reminded me that progress is made one step at a time. I didn't have to be perfect overnight. I just had to keep moving forward. And little by little, I did. My vocabulary grew, my sentences became clearer, and my confidence soared. I began to enjoy speaking English, and I no longer feared making mistakes. I had conversations with strangers. I read books in English without feeling overwhelmed, and I even started thinking in English. It became a part of me, something that no longer felt foreign, but familiar. I remember one day, I was sitting with my grandmother. She had always spoken to me in English, and I would respond in our native language because I was too afraid to speak English with her. But that day, something changed. I looked at her and spoke to her in English. For the first time, we had a real conversation without needing to switch between languages. It was a simple conversation, but to me, it was monumental. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized that the language barrier between us had finally disappeared. It wasn't just about speaking English anymore, it was about being able to connect with the people I loved in a way I had never been able to before. That's what language is. It's not just words and grammar. It's a bridge. It's a way to connect with people, to share your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences. It's a way to open doors to new opportunities, new friendships, and new possibilities. And the more you practice, the more confident you become, the wider those doors will open for you. There were still days when I struggled. Days when I would listen to native speakers and feel like I would never reach their level. But I reminded myself that fluency is not about being perfect. It's about being able to communicate. It's about being able to express yourself, to share your ideas, and to connect with others. And that's something you can do, even if your words aren't perfect. So, if you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling like you'll never be able to speak fluently, I want you to remember this. You are on a journey. Every time you speak, every time you practice, you are moving forward. You may not see the progress today, but one day you will look back and realize just how far you've come. Fluency is not a destination. It's a process, and it's a process that requires patience, perseverance, and a lot of practice. But I promise you, it's worth it. Because one day you will find yourself speaking without hesitation, without fear, and you will feel a sense of pride that you never imagined possible. If I could give you one piece of advice, it would be this: be kind to yourself. Don't expect perfection. Embrace your mistakes because they are helping you learn. Surround yourself with English and immerse yourself in the language as much as you can. And most importantly, never give up. Keep going. Keep practicing. Keep pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. Because fluency is within your reach, and one day you will get there. And when you do, you'll realize that all the struggles, all the frustration, all the hard work was worth it. Because you'll be able to stand tall, speak confidently, and share your story with the world. Just like I'm doing today.